Hello, everybody. I'm here today with a great musician who was born in San Francisco on October the 27th of 1934. He put liberty and freedom at the very heart of his musical life, which spans more than 60 years. He experienced so many different things on the upright bass during his career. He was the pioneer, one of the pioneers of the free jazz movements since the beginning of the 30s. And he currently lives now in the south of France since 1972. It's my great pleasure to welcome Barre Phillips. Hello, Barre, and how you doing?
Good morning, Matthew. Are you okay? Is everything good?
Everything's right. How are things going near the Mediterranean Sea? Because you're living in the south of France in the department of Var.
Yes. You have enough, is there enough light on me here? Would you like
Actually, there is enough lights, yes. I mean,
Okay.
if you want to put some lights more, it's up to you, but
No,
that will do.
if the light is good for you, that's fine.
So, as I was saying as an introduction, it's a great honor to welcome you here in this program dedicated to archives of people who made jazz actually during the last decades, and you're part of them. And my first question is: are you from a family who listened to a lot of jazz during your childhood?
No, there was, as a child, there was no jazz in the house at all. There was no classical music in the house either. But I have an older brother, 4 years older, who was into music at the age of 7 or 8. And he was as a performer. And as he got to be an adolescent and on beyond before he left home, which was about when he was like 18 or 19, I don't remember precisely, then the jazz music and classical music were in the house, but only through his collections and at his listening times. Mm-hmm. It didn't become part of the family situation.
Were your parents musicians, or did they listen to a lot of music at home?
No. There was my father was somebody who sang a lot, right, as he was working, and going back to those times of the 1920s and 30s and 40s when they were growing up. Mm-hmm. The singing in the home was part of what was going on. There was always some kind of keyboard there, and my mother could play keyboard enough to read songs and play songs and some hymns and stuff, but she wasn't a musician, and she didn't work on the piano as a piano player, just only to do a bit of accompanying songs, like a school teacher would do.
Okay. As I was saying in the introduction, you were born in San Francisco on the west coast of the United States. Can you describe for us the general atmosphere in the 40s in San Francisco?
Well, we moved from San Francisco when I was a year and a half old, so I didn't grow up in San Francisco, you know. And the general era of things during the 40s, I spent the major part of the 40s living in the countryside in Southern Oregon. So that was like commuting with the school bus to go to school in the town, and living a rather isolated life with just the family, you know, and very few friends at that time. When we came back to civilization, would have been in the Second World War was already over. So it was like 1946
Mm-hmm.
1945, 46.
I mean, that's a pity that you didn't grow up in San Francisco during the 40s and 50s because music was thriving out there. There are so many great jazz clubs in San Francisco, like the Black Hawk and the Bob City. You could have immersed into the West Coast jazz movements in that period. Was there lots of jazz clubs in Oregon at that time?
I have no idea. I was just a kid. I was just a little kid, right? So I have no idea what was going on. I wasn't started in music yet. I didn't start in music until it's still 1947. So, you know, what was going on in the 40s anywhere. I mean, later on, I did know the Black Hawk Club and the Jazz Workshop in San Francisco and Bob City.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, of course, I did.
Bar, what was the first jazz record that you listened to?
The first jazz record, I don't know precisely, but it was either Louis Armstrong or Kid Ory in that area. It was the Dixieland music.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, from my brother's music.
Were you attracted right away with that music, or did it come later on?
Attracted to the music. I think I was more touched by classical music in the very beginnings, and
Okay.
for many years, if we talk about my California years and just interviewed after I had started playing the bass at the music available to play was jazz music because of my brother saying, "Oh, you got a bass? Come on, you're playing in my band, in our band, as it were." And okay, I did fine, and I started playing the bass in public school where we played in the symphony orchestra. So it was the two things starting at the same time, actually.
What did you learn from your first teacher at that time?
Well, my first teacher, I in the California system at that time, and it was rather prevalent in the USA, and even today, there wasn't this conservatory system of where you must do an apprenticeship in music and on an instrument before you can join an ensemble. You you started playing in the ensemble with no teaching, no apprenticeship, no learning about music or the instrument. I started playing with just like that. You want to play? Come on and play.
So you came to double bass thanks to your brother. Did you start with the piano at the beginning?
I didn't come to double bass thanks to my brother. No, I came to be exposed to music because of my brother, and he invited me to play in the group he was playing in where they needed a bass player. There was no bass player.
Okay.
And the bass came to me. It's a nice story. It's
yeah.
yes. In junior high school, in junior high school, which in terms of the grades are the seventh and eighth grade, right? Mm-hmm. So in the very first year, in the first year of the junior high school, in the very first week, all the kids in the school had to take choir. You had to sing, and it was a very large choir room, and there was a choir teacher, and during the first or second choir class, which was once a week, there was instrumental music in the junior high school. This was in Palo Alto, California, where it was quite a rich city at the time.
Okay.
In terms of its supported, was the city right next to Stanford University, and it brought a lot of interesting things, including money, into the community. And So in junior high school already, there was a music teacher. There was a band room. There was for the orchestra and the bands. And there was an instrument collection, of which the large instruments were present. You know, there were basses and kettle drums and pianos, and the bigger instruments, maybe even the smaller instruments too. I don't really know. But the woman, whose name was Barbara, came to the choir class to make a pitch for the orchestra. And so she was saying, you know, talking about the orchestra and its activities.
Right.
And then she went through just the list of instruments that were open, places in the orchestra that were open, and to see if anybody was interested. And when she came to the bass, I had a vision, and the vision was of my name on the marquee over a theater, right? And my hand went up instantly without even thinking about it, and saying, yes, I want to play the bass. I want to play the bass. Mm-hmm. I was sitting with my two rowdy friends, one on each side of me, and what can you call it? The flash was so strong that they also said, yes, I want to play the bass too. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so the next morning at the orchestra rehearsal, there were 3 new bass players. Mm-hmm. And 3 people to play the bass. And one of them stayed into playing the bass for his whole life. That was me. And
Bar, you really dedicated your life experimenting new approaches on the upright bass. What was the first feeling that you feel when you first play on the double bass on this instrument?
Well, the early feelings were really apprenticeship, in terms of you have to learn how to control the pitch. You have to learn how to read music. You have to learn how to control the rhythm so that you can play with the other people. Like for jazz and classical music, it's the same. It's not the same apprenticeship, but it's the same problematic, right? Is you have to know how to play the instrument and how to play that music. So my getting into experimental music didn't happen until the early 60s, before I went to New York.
What kind of material were you playing? Did you play like jazz standards, or were you already composing?
No, I was brought up on Dixieland, playing the repertoire.
Okay.
And then went from there to playing bebop with the repertoire, right? In jazz. And in classical music, it was romantic, from the romantic and classical periods, right? The standard basic classical orchestra repertoire, and at the school level. I was very lucky in that between this junior school and the high school and the university, Stanford University, the music teachers knew each other, and they worked together for the more talented students in the orchestra could move up a notch. So when I was in high school, I was playing in the university orchestra as well. And
when you were at the university, were you already playing some gigs with some musicians that already had some reputation as a solid players, as a solid professional players?
No.
No?
I didn't play until later with professional musicians.
What was your first gig as a professional musician? Do you recall it?
Well, it depends. If you're getting paid, does that mean you're a professional?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. That happened very early on. That they in the junior school, I started playing the bass in the orchestra. After about a month or so, the teacher said, "Hey, you could, I can hear that you would be able to do this, and there is a bass teacher in town, and if you like, I could talk to your mother and see if it would be a good thing to take lessons." So I asked my mom, and she said yes. And the teacher talked to my mom, and then they took me to the bass teacher. So I had a Saturday afternoon, had a lesson, and I had a second lesson, and a third lesson. And after the third lesson, he said to me, "Next week, after the lesson in Saturday evening, I play guitar as well, and I have a little tea party gig here in town. And if you would like to accompany me, that would be great. If you would like to play with me." And so I said, "Yeah, sounds great." So, I'm 14 years old. I mean, so talk to talk to my mother again, and yes, it's okay. And so we go and do that, and I have no idea what I played. I can't remember what I played at all, but I accompanied him playing standards at a tea party. And
Yeah, that was the point of my question. If your first gigs were more like top 40s repertoire or more into already jazz materials.
well, not that's neither. The top 40 didn't exist at that time.
Okay.
It was invented later, right?
Okay.
But the popular songs of the day, yes, like you say, top 40. But it was more the repertoire
Broad,
of show tunes. Yes,
yeah, Broadway show tunes. Okay. Okay.
and so that. But he was not a jazz musician, right? He was a cocktail musician,
Mm-hmm.
and also playing classical bass. And after that accompaniment part, that little gig for which I got paid $5, which was incredible. Yeah, my first gig at 14
Yeah, that's something. Yeah.
for $5. And then he said, "Okay, that's enough lessons. You don't need any lessons." But I just stayed on as his bass player, and for about a year, and which didn't mean we were working every week, but from time to time. But he said that was enough bass lessons, and that was interesting. There's some of those gigs were interesting. That gigs doing with him, and at the same time as that was going on, I was playing Dixieland in my brother's band and learning how to do that, and learning what the measure was and how many beats in the measure and what the chord was and how to. So I started out playing in 4/4, which is a great majority of the jazz repertoire, right? And even though we're playing Dixieland, era jazz.
That's an interesting thing because did you listen a lot to Dixieland's record like Sidney Bechet, Louis Armstrong? Because people who played free jazz like Albert Eller also used to like very much Dixieland and New Orleans jazz as a first inspiration. Was it your case also?
Well, in terms of jazz, yes, but it was very soon Duke Ellington and Count Basie as well.
Mm-hmm.
And not just Dixieland. But that is also, it's coming from the influence of my brother, right? Until he left home. And but he left home in a come and go kind of way, right? He didn't like move and go to New York when he was 18 years old or something like that. But,
Okay.
so he was around and still influencing my listening. And he had gone beyond the classical music and into what was the contemporary music of the time, and with Stravinsky and Bartok, and and I was very struck by the big Stravinsky pieces, the big orchestra pieces, The Rite of Spring, Petrushka, and going on, and in Bartok, the string quartets. So, but now I'm talking about when I'm 16 years old.
Okay.
I'm 14 years old, okay? And I was very marked, although I was not capable of playing that music, and I had no opportunity to play that music either. I thought it was fantastic. So already from the age of 16, I was very drawn towards a more, more contemporary classical music than I was to the traditional classical and romantic periods, you know. And
Yeah.
my interest in old music, pre-romantic music, came later, right?
Okay.
Yes.
Bar at the end of the 50s, like 1958, appeared records like The Shape of Jazz to come from Ornette Coleman. How did you welcome this music in jazz?
It was fantastic. The where I was at in my own performing in jazz and performing on the bass, I could really relate to the Ornette quartet, right? And the social aspect of it really was also very appealing to me. And but coming from Dixieland and having a lot of Dixieland experience, it made a lot of sense to me what they were doing. Okay.
Yeah, because of the collective improvisation that was still the case in the free jazz, right?
Yes, the collective improvisation yeah, in terms of then the organization of the music. I could see that it was not a copy of, but that it was very logical.
Yeah, the structure still remains the same. Yeah.
Whereas bebop had developed, and bebop and post bebop, well, going up until Ornette came along, right? Say 1960, was a very had become super sophisticated in harmonic terms. Okay. And Ornette was back to just playing on the triad and the more simple harmonic forms that that I associated with the earlier music with Dixieland, and I appreciated that a lot. Being a bass player and playing in harmony, playing down in the basic part of things, right? In jazz as a bass player. So, and also, I in 1957, I had met Ornette in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay.
Which was just a good chance on my part, but it came through my brother, and who was still around, who hadn't left for New York yet, and took me along to a meeting with Ornette when the Modern Jazz Quartet was there, because John Lewis was very interested in Ornette and had a lot to do with getting Ornette out to the East Coast.
Okay.
And there was a meeting near San Francisco while the Modern Jazz Quartet was playing in the Black Hawk, actually. And Ornette and Don came up to meet with them.
Don Cherry.
Yes, they had. John Lewis had heard them play in Los Angeles, but they had no time to speak, and he invited them to come up and to meet on the day off from playing in the club. It was still on the West Coast, and before the Modern Jazz Quartet went back to New York, and they came and spent a Sunday afternoon together, where I happened to be there, and so just as a bystander, not as a participant. And
So, yeah. Mm.
It was quite a mystery to me. The whole thing was quite a mystery to me. But that is where I met them, and was able to have that meeting contact, and that which Ornette and Don both.
Yeah.
uh,
And did you play
oh,
with them that day? Did you play with
oh,
them?
no, I didn't know.
Okay.
No.
So you met with Arnett in '57 when he wasn't known yet. So you had the chance to meet him at the very early stage of his career.
Yes, it was before New York, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think he was fairly well known in LA, but not in San Francisco, that's for sure. Right.
And what specifically attracted you in his music? I mean, the way he played sophisticated bebop, as Arnett was used to play that.
Well, Ornette didn't play bebop. He was not a bebop player.
No, but when you listen to his tunes, it was very well structured. I mean, his improvisation was freer, obviously, but the composition was still in tunes with our harmony. Don't you think so?
Yes, but they didn't use a harmonic structure then to improvise on.
Sure.
Some of the tunes would be with a pedal tone, right?
Yeah.
Then that's normally, it seems to me, without really studying the situation, that it was due to Charlie Hayden and the bass line that he would come up to accompany the head, the tune that they were playing, and he would keep, and it was very appealing because it was so open. It was like improvising with Dixieland, which was very appealing because it was away from the chord structure. There was the chord structure that you had to follow. Okay, and then and the music was very friendly. Later on, the music became had a lot of social content in it. When the already with Albert Eiler it's changing its nature. Okay.
Bar, there were musicians who were the link between bebop and free jazz, like Jimmy Jeffrey, Lee Konitz, people you worked with also. What was their role into this link between harmonic music and free jazz?
Well, that's an interesting subject that I wonder if anybody has written a book about that, for doing it for his master's thesis or doctorate thesis. But I know with Jimmy Jeffrey that he had met Ornette in Los Angeles, and he had been completely turned around by Ornette's kind of philosophy and his mysterious ideas about the harmomelodics, that he was always going to write a book about harmomelodics, but he never did.
Yeah, too complicated maybe to explain.
Yeah, I understand that part. I think I understand that part. And Jimmy Jeffrey had come to a changing part in his personal life as well, not only in his musical life, but in his personal life as well. It was all going together. So he changed instruments for a good many years, especially during the free fall trio that he had with Paul Bley and Steve Swallow, and started composing in a different way than he had been from his straight jazz experiences, and he it was very funny in American terms because Jeffrey, in his times in LA before he went to New York, and had earned a lot of money in the studios with film music, with doing the thing, right? He was a guy with a big house and a swimming pool, and changed his wife every 6 months, and
Oh, really?
had a lot of wives, and
Okay.
had a lot of wives, and when he changed his music, it all went away. So and all the money went away because it was not a money earning experience, as it never was for Ornette either.
Yeah.
Ornette never got to the level of a pop musician and anywhere near it in terms of
Unfortunately, yeah.
earning money. Well, I don't think it was unfortunate. Ornette wasn't there to make money. That wasn't why he was doing this.
Yeah.
And he had enough money after he got established, say from the mid 70s on, or I don't know exactly, but he had enough money to live a reasonable life. He wasn't a poor guy, homeless and everything. He was doing okay. And I don't think he needed any more money than that, right? So,
Okay.
but it's just the irony of the situation on the American framework of scenes, where
Yeah.
success is supposed to bring you money, right? And,
Yeah.
yeah.
Bar, would you describe Jimmy Jeffrey as a free jazz musician in a sense in some of his compositions?
Well, definitely, he's definitely a variety of free jazz, free jazz music, right? Writing themes, and the variations on the themes are all freely improvised, right? There's no tonal center, there's no chord structure, and they're freely were freely improvised. And I was very happy to work with Jimmy for 2 years.
Yeah.
After the Free Fall Trio, right, happened. And by that time, he was completely unpopular, had lost his Columbia record contract because of didn't sell enough records. And so he didn't have a record company anymore. He'd gone from being a Mercury record star in LA to on to Columbia Records, and with Tio Macero and all the big jazz production stuff, because of what he could do as a I say commercial jazz musician. And but when he changed music and after meeting Ornette, right, it all went away.
Yeah.
And
What years was it during the 2 years you worked with Jimmy?
that was 1965, 66. That lasted for 2 weeks here in Europe, right? Coming out of New York, where the tour organizer here in Europe, thought he was getting the Jimmy Jeffrey Trio from the Train in the River time, right? But his subtone clarinet playing, and playing a nice soft lilty jazz, right, with guitar and bass, and when he was very surprised that this Jimmy Jeffrey was in the avant-garde.
Yeah.
It was a 2-week tour with 2 bands, Jimmy Jeffrey Trio. That was in 1965, and Art Blakey Jazz Messengers, right? There were two groups on the program that traveled around together, playing 2 weeks, playing gigs for 2 weeks, right? And in Europe, and it was not my first time in Europe, but I had come to Europe the year before, 1964, already once, and but it was very funny because it was not only this tour organizer who was surprised, but several of the audiences were surprised. There is one, it's like a radio recording from Paris.
Okay.
Exists of that trio, right? And to my knowledge, that's the only recording that there is. It's just a recording of the concert, a radio recording of the concert.
Mm-hmm.
And the French guys got together to put it out. Even after Jimmy had passed away, I think.
Bar, is it around this time at the end of the 50s that you first met up with Eric Dolphy in the West Coast?
My connection with Dolphy was very brief. And
Okay.
in 1963, I've been in New York about 5 or 6 months, and I got a call oh, it's very windy here, and the shutter's closed, and the light goes away. So and I got a call to play one concert with Gunther Schuller and his Orchestra USA scene, right?
Mm-hmm.
That program there were about over half of the pieces had 2 basses on them, and the regular bass player was Richard Davis. And so they needed a second bass player for the pieces where there was, and so I got a call for that. That's a whole story in itself. Why would they know me being there just a few months? And why would they call me when they basically didn't even know me? And and I don't mind telling you that story if you're interested. But so Dolphy was playing in that orchestra, and the recording that is from there is of a Gunther Schuller piece called Abstractions, right? Which was originally written for Ornette, with the chamber orchestra, with Ornette as a soloist. But for whatever reasons, the Ornette, I don't believe, ever played the piece. And this was, I don't know if this was the first performance of the piece or not, but it was recorded by Gunther Schuller with just one microphone. And it's just a witness of the concert, to record the concert to have for his archives, for his personal use, which was later then put out by Inja Records, a German company. And there's also on that tape and on the record a jam session piece.
Oh, really?
Yes. At the end of the concert, the people were very enthusiastic, and Gunther Schuller said, "So why don't you guys go out and do a jam session piece?"
Right.
So at that point, Richard Davis had his bag on the bass already because he had another job, and he was off to do the other job. And so it was, okay, Bar, you play. And so I went out and played them. They played a bebop piece, a Charlie Parker Head. It's escaped me at the moment anyway. And so Dolphy had joined in, and Don Ellis was playing, Kenny Goldson, and a bunch of great players were playing, and Dolphy has a long solo on it that is incredible. And there's a bass solo as well. Yeah, there's a bass solo on there, which is quite interesting. And so that was included on this record called Vintage Dolphy. Okay, there's a bunch of other pieces from Dolphy that had previously unrecorded, previously unpublished, and that came out. But we had a little bit of exchange during the rehearsals and concert, but he left for Europe very soon thereafter, and there was
Yes.
So there was no connection, or he gave me a call, or come on, let's
Mhm.
go rehearse, or anything like that. No, there was just a gig, just did a gig together.
Barry, you were mentioning earlier in this interview the back and forth trips of your brother to New York, and you followed his path to New York at the age of 28 in 1962. What made you choosing to move to New York at that time?
Ornette Coleman,
Really?
yes,
Okay.
in 1960 and 61, 61, 62, yeah, 61 and 62. I played in a quartet in Berkeley, California, where I was living. I was a university student for a long time in Berkeley. And then we had a quartet who was playing, was a rhythm section in vibes. You have friends playing together. And we ended up getting a gig that lasted 6 nights a week for 1 year. And that was incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, Ornette's girlfriend was the cousin. She was a painter, and Eve. And Eve was the cousin of the piano player in the group, whose name is Peter Engelhardt. And and Eve and Ornette had come out to California to take a break. It was in the difficult times of Ornette when they were very broke and there was no work. It was in 1962, and they came out to us for some fresh air. And Eve came to the club where we were playing and brought Ornette, and Ornette had his horn. And he sat in with us and played a set with us, right? Just what we were playing, not free improvisation. And so the set is over and everybody's thanking, thank you very much, thank you very much. And he's thanking us and he says, oh, that's fine, but why are you playing school music? And the school music, because we're playing repertoire, right? We're playing Horace Silver and Dave Brubeck and
Okay.
so. Okay, and then if we had one or two originals, they were right in the genre, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's going on in commercial jazz at the time. And why are you playing this school music? And so we looked at each other, the four of us in the quartet, and the piano player and I said, you're absolutely right. Why are we playing the school music? And the other two guys, the drummer and the bass player, said, well, we're playing the school music because we like it, because that's what's happening and that's what we want to do.
Yeah.
And the band was over. A week later, the band was dissolved. And 2 months later, I left for New York because I had to get out of school music. But the jazz community, people in the jazz community in the San Francisco and in the Bay Area have been telling me for some time, if you really want to play, man, you got to leave San Francisco. The best place to go is Chicago or New York.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got to move. And but Ornette coming along and saying, and giving it that term, school music, that that did the change for me, and that I went on to New York.
Was there a lot of places to play in the thriving jazz community in New York and in the early 60s as a free jazz player?
No,
No, not so
no,
many.
as a free jazz player, no, not at all. There was a lot of activity going on,
Mm-hmm.
right? There were experimental things. I met Don Ellis because he had a workshop going on once a week, right, in a loft.
Okay.
It was even a borrowed loft. It wasn't even his, right? But to do things, and meeting with Don brought me a lot of a lot of wonderful things later. And playing with Don and playing at home. I always had a piano in my flat, no matter how run down and cheap the flat was. I always had a small grand piano, and so people over to play and experimentation. As I said, later actually joining up with Jimmy Jufrey, right? We played it in 2 years' time. We played once in New York City, and that was as part of this October Revolution going on, right? And even that we played in duo because Don Friedman was off with a professional job somewhere. It wasn't available that day, and no, there was not a lot. There were a lot of places to earn a living as a jazz musician.
Yeah.
Which I did, and was able to support myself performing. And
but it was more like hard bop kind of jazz, not like free jazz, real free jazz music, right?
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. In the jazz clubs, yes.
Bart, was it the lack of professional engagement who brought you to move to Europe in 1967?
No, not at all, not at all, not at all. I started traveling to Europe in 1964, and so I've been in New York for 2 years, and this was through Jimmy Jufrey, and it was as part of the George Russell Sextet, which was very nice avant-garde jazz, right? I wouldn't call it free jazz, but I'd definitely call it avant-garde jazz.
Yeah.
And by that time, the first times coming to Europe, there was the record was out with Archie Shepp, which was originally just a gig, but later which was recorded, as happens at the Newport Festival. They record everything, and was released. Even there's bits of that on 2 records, and so in terms of the records were on Impulse, so you've got the big distribution as a jazz thing, and so for Europeans who are following this stuff, right? The record was important to them, and with the kind of endorsement of Coltrane being on one side with the new thing at Newport, and which Chance would have it, and I was the bass player on there. So touring in Europe, a lot of people already knew who I was. In 1967, I had planned and did go to London. I was planning to stay for 2 months and to do some research that had nothing to do with music, and a personal project. And I planned to stay for 2 months. And during that 2 months, so much happened in the musical front. Can you come to Paris and play, and playing in London and meeting John Sermon. Starting to play from the very first day I was in England with Evan Parker and other people from the avant-garde way of their version of free jazz.
So that's the first time you met John Sermon in 1967 in London, right? During this trip to London?
That's right, yeah.
Okay. Did you decide at that time to collaborate with him, like you will do the following years?
No,
not
at
yet.
that time. No,
not at that time. Okay.
John got to a point in his development, commercial development in England, right? He became the new star of the year for the Metronome magazine, the newspaper magazine. and he was thinking it's time for me to get some international stuff going and get off the island.
Mm-hmm.
By that time, we knew each other. He had invited me on a few of his the recordings he was making during that time, some big band stuff, and which I was very happy to do, and
Yeah.
had the right experience to be able to do it correctly. And my friend Stu Martin,
Yeah.
the
drummer.
the drummer with whom I had played quite a lot in New York, was coming through town and was going to stay in London for a few days.
Mm-hmm.
And said it would be great to play. And so I called John and would you like to have a play? And so actually we went to Stu's hotel and we played in Stu's hotel and in his room.
Okay.
And we had a big room, and then he had all his drums and everything. And we had a good time playing. And this, for John, was the answer of what to do. So he, very shortly after that, proposed to us that we do a certain amount of gigs together that he had started in October, went over into November. And by the time we had prepared the gigs and played the first couple of gigs, we really liked it very much and saw the way of how to stay together and form a trio, right? Which we did.
So you really started to feel, yes, an inspiration through John Sherman's way of playing right away. And there is an interesting video on YouTube. You were playing with Friedrich Gulda. You can watch it on YouTube with John Sermon and Kenny Wheeler and the guitar player, Pierre Cavalli. How come did you ended up playing with Friedrich Gulda at that time?
Well, that was just a gig, a gig that I don't know if Gulda called me up or if the producer called me up, called us up, right? But Gulda was a complex but interesting personality.
Very interesting personality, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And he was very attracted to jazz, and he loved the feeling of playing jazz, and was attracted by the free music.
Especially coming from classical music, he's maybe one of the unique person who really got into jazz, into feeling what really jazz is, coming from the classical culture.
Well, I would call Gulda more a dilettante than somebody who was, I think he was more, there were certainly things appealing to him in the music of jazz, but I think it was more the social setting of jazz.
Okay.
That appealed to Gulda as a classical musician. Is little that I played with Gulda, because I didn't join Gulda in a band, and we did played a lot. I only met with him one, two, three occasions, and two festival things, and that TV recording from Germany.
Was a success. It's a very interesting TV recording. So I advise the viewer to watch it on YouTube, because you can really feel connection between all together. I mean, yeah.
Well, maybe so. There was some good players there. As I recall, Tony Oxley's playing drums, right?
Right, and the underestimated guitar player, Guitar Cavalli, who was an extraordinary guitar player because he experiments a lot. He was one of the pioneers of electric guitar.
Maybe so. I knew him very little, and he was a friend of Goulda's and was working with Goulda, right? So he as on other things that Goulda also had a jazz drummer that he was his drummer for playing jazz, and you know, I don't know so many of the details, but I remember hearing already in the earlier '60s, before that time in the '60s, before that recording, and so of Goulda bringing a bunch of musicians from New York, right, from the top studio guys, because he had so much Austrian money to produce that everybody was saying, yeah, come on, man, we'll be happy to do that, right? For the New York style, you got the dough, you got the money, you can have pretty much what you want, right?
Yeah. So, Barre, you decided to settle down in Europe in the late '60s. Can you describe the general atmosphere that you felt at that time in Europe compared to the US? And was free jazz better perceived in Europe than in the US at that time?
Absolutely, absolutely. The free jazz scene in the USA never made it on the market, right? There was a lot of activity. There's still a lot of activity today going on. The people who are, how would you say, sticking or adhering to that style of playing, right? What the free jazz evolved into that doesn't have all that much to do with Ornette's original band and music, to my feeling anyway. Whereas during the late '60s and on into the '70s, it was quite popular in Europe. Now, you have to realize that there's a enormous business structure, culture structure differences between the USA and Europe. In the USA, basically, there's a limited amount of record companies that will be able to financially support an artist. Okay.
Okay.
You look at the amount of traditional jazz musicians who were supported through their lifetimes, right? And there's a handful. I mean, for the amount of musicians that were working there in a grassroots level, you know, it's not such a big number of musicians. And because there's in the USA, you either make it or break it, right? You make it big or you don't make it at all.
You don't have a second chance. Yeah.
Well, it's not the second chance part. It's that there's no middle ground. And during the '40s and '50s and on into the '60s, it was possible to be a grassroots musician. That is to say, you lived in a town, probably not too small a town, so there were enough bars, enough activities going on to be a jazz musician.
Right.
And you could earn a modest life, right? You could have a modest life. But as soon as the speculators got into the mix in the '70s, okay, that everything started to change. Like the '60s, when I lived in New York, you could live in Manhattan and be poor. It was possible to find a flat to rent for $50, $60. I never paid more than $100 for a flat to live in, right? And so if you're working regularly, even if you're only earning $10 a day, it's still okay, right? You could do that. Well, all of that started to leave in the '70s in the USA, and it's been long gone for a long time, for many years now, right? the basically real estate speculation has taken over, and probably is never going to get undone again, as it's become such a integral part of the capitalist system that I don't see it going backwards for equity between and the distribution of wealth to be happening. No, the idea is that everybody's supposed to be rich and not to share the riches that we have. And if you're not rich, well, fuck you. Yeah.
Barre, you started off touring a lot during the early 670s with Stu and John in Europe. You were kind of the lighthouse of free jazz, the free jazz scene in Europe, right, at that time?
Well, we had a very successful, I would say, 2 years. And then there was internal problems in the group, and the group stopped for a good year and a half. We started at the end of 1969, right? And first gig was in October of 1969. And then we stopped in October of 1971. So that was 69 to 70, 70, 71. That's 2 years.
And do you want to speak about this internal problem inside the group?
No, I would just say it was mixed. It was exacerbated by drugs and alcohol.
Okay.
But no, it's not something to talk about.
Okay. Barre, you were part also of one of the first French free jazz record with, the record is called Alors, with Michel Portal. Do you recall this session?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah? Can you talk about it?
Well, I was living in Paris at the time. That was like 1970, I believe.
Yeah.
I was living in Paris, and through Michel's invitation, I'd been playing with Michel and Jean-Pierre Jouet, the percussionist. Okay, and we were playing improvised music, but basically at home. Didn't make a band and start doing tours, and there's records, etc. But at the same time, I was playing with Stu and John in this free jazz setting where I was playing at home with Michel and Jean-Pierre in improvised contemporary music. Yes, it had nothing to do with jazz. And I said, what? I said to myself, and then I said it to Gerard Terrones, who was the alternative record producer around at that time. And proposed to him the project, and everybody was in agreement to that, low budget stuff and everything. And so we met for one day in Paris and made the record. And at that time, I didn't want to call it a Barre Phillips record, so there was no name on the record about whose record it is. It's just Alors.
Yeah, it's just Alors. Yeah.
And then later, I don't know if it was Michel or whoever, they said it's a Michel Portal record.
Barre, you were also the first jazz musician to record a bass solo record. It's called Bass Bar. Do you want to speak about this first record?
Yes. During my time in London, I said earlier I was going to stay for 2 months in London. I ended up staying a year and a half as the projects that I went there for became more and more interesting. And at the same time, I was coming to realize that life in Europe was so much more attractive because people were inviting me to come and play, not as a professional bass player who can do the job, which was the situation in New York, okay? but for what I can do, what I do, for my artistic expression. That is why I ended up staying in Europe, and I understood this after I'd been around just for a few months in Europe, that people were asking me not as a professional musician, okay, can you do the job? Are you a nice guy? Can you get there on time? Do you not take too much money? All these New York things, right? But they were asking me because of what I play. And so that was very different. Now to get to this first solo record, while I was living in London, I had I had a friend from New York, Max Schubel, a composer, not a performer, and a composer in contemporary music, and whom I had met through my brother, and we had become a bit friendly.
Okay.
And I don't think we did anything together in my time in New York, but he wrote to me in London and said, "I'm coming to London and I want to record a piece of mine, right? It's for bass, flute, cello, and everybody plays a little bit of percussion from the three players, right? Can you get the musicians together for me? I'll take care of getting the recording studio and the engineers and all that part. Can you contact the musicians?" I said, "Yes, I'd be happy to do that." I did that. We made his record, and which it turned out he had just started his own record company, which I didn't even know about at the time. But then he said, and also, well, he was in London. He's in London already, and we've done the record. And he says, "So there's more I would like to do, because I'm starting to work in the Columbia University electroacoustic studios, and to make tape music, and I would like to use bass sounds from your bass. Would you be willing to, tomorrow, that we go in a studio and you record, and you record for me, I'll fix the technical part." And they're just bass sounds. He knew that I was doing a lot of research on the bass and was looking at things, and had been participating some in contemporary music on the bass. And I said, "Yeah, sure." So he didn't set up a studio, he set up a church. And we went to the church. He had an engineer there. The engineer had 2 Reeboxes, so he didn't have to stop. He could just go from one Reebok to the next. He didn't have to stop and change the tape. And I played for over an hour. I don't know exactly how long, but I played straight through for over an hour. He didn't talk to me. He didn't say, "I want this kind of sound or that kind of sound."
Okay. So the record session happened to be in a church, right?
Yes.
So it was kind of a prayer session. For the first solo bass record. What an historical date for you.
Well,
Incredible.
it was very unusual, because I was not playing to make a record. I was playing to give him sound source.
Yeah.
I was playing what I play. And
Barre, during the early 70s, you happened to be one of the first jazz musicians to record for ECM, a record company. How the relation developed between you and Manfred Escher through the years?
Okay. Well, in the end of the 60s, I had met Manfred before he started ECM, when he was a bass player in Berlin. He was playing jazz and classical music. He had played in the Berlin Philharmonic and for a year. And here he was, when I met him, he was playing in a jazz group, in a jazz club. And I was there with, probably with with John Sermon, I can't remember with whom, but we went to the jazz club after the concert, and somebody said, come on, we'll go to this jazz club. And he was playing in the band, and we met and just said hello then. Then in 1970,
Okay.
yes, we were doing a radio production in Hamburg, and with a large ensemble. There was a group Circle, which was Chick Corea, Anthony Braxton, Barry Alshul, and Dave Holland. That group was called Circle, and the trio with John Sermon, Stu Martin, and myself, plus some added musicians, right? And we had composed for that, and we were doing a double the group meeting plus people radio production. And during that time, those a couple of days that we were working together, Manfred Eiger shows up. He showed up at the recording sessions, and during a break or whatever, he came over and talked to Dave and I and proposed to us to to make a bass duo record, and we said yes, yes, why not? That's an unusual thing. Let's do that.
Yeah. And
we met a couple of months later, and probably 3 months later, in what the ECM was using as a studio at that time near Stuttgart, and made that record, Music for Two Basses, with Dave Holland, right? That was the first project that we did together, and from that time, Manfred Eicher was very happy with the results, and to both of us separately, he said, so what else have you got? You know, what else did you do?
Yeah.
And then we've been working on and off together all through the years, right?
Bar, now I would like you to explain to us, as the free jazz musician, what are the constraints of freedom in music? I mean, do you put a frame in your music when you improvise a free jazz?
Well, you have to look at, I think, that form a bit to make a intelligent question like that. The free jazz form, right? If it's using thematic material or not, okay, had a particular form to it. It's basically starting off with some material, okay, with a theme or not, and then developing the material in a kind of crescendo that finally gets to its maximum limit of expression, and then stops, and then in the kind of concerts, or even not concert, the situation of people playing together that are not a group and don't have a plan and a way of working together. Then there's a lull in the activities, while the next theme comes up, or if it's not a theme, if there's no theme, there's the material comes up to repeat that form again, right? Starting from a little bit and building and building and building until it's completely built up, and
right.
It explodes and stops, okay? So to me, that form is really typical of free jazz, okay? And then if you look at how I improvise today, it's there are those tendencies involved, right? Because of development. And those tendencies are involved in classical music, in a symphony, for example. from one movement to the other, there is definitely a development and a building of things to not to necessarily the the maximum, but to a strong conclusion after the development part. Okay, it's same in song form as well, where there are lyrics, and the lyrics are telling a story. And in the story, there's a development of the story, and then the surprising and wonderful end of the story. And okay, guess who I saw today, my love, and then, and then etc. So the in terms of form, but the what I'm now calling today the social content of protest, of general protest, has not been a factor in what I do, or even what the young people around me do. We have an improvising collective here has been going on for over 10 years, okay, of which I'm now and always have been the oldest member, and the youngest members now are in their 40s, and there's no protest going in. There's strength, there is muscle, there is development, but there's no screaming. We're not screaming out, okay? And the maybe it is the presence of the scream, or the absence of the scream, and it is what is going to enter into the definition of free jazz or free improvised music.
Barre, can we learn to be free?
Can you learn to be free in an overall global way?
In the global way, yeah, in a philosophical way.
Absolutely.
And how come?
It's not how come, it's how.
How? Sorry.
How do you do that?
Yeah.
You breathe deeply. You do all these things to develop your mindfulness, to be able to see clearly what's going on, right? I think being free it doesn't mean that you don't have to make choices. There's always choices to be made. But as you grow older and you hopefully, and you grow older, you see more and more things that are quite okay and quite acceptable, and that you don't have to say no to, that you could say, you do your thing, that's fine, glad to have you there. But, you know, so much of the world today is not free in terms of real democracy, in a political sense, in a social sense. And how to be free, to have a free spirit there inside when it's not allowed to be free, okay, is a very interesting question about
it is a tricky one. It is a tricky one.
But
yeah,
tricky. You could say tricky, but it's
go on.
It's a difficult question, but it's in terms of living it, of how to live it. It is maybe not so difficult to understand in an intellectual way.
Yeah.
But in a spiritual and metaphysical way, I do believe that it's takes quite a lot of experience for the majority of people, right? To be able to develop a way of how we can live and feel free, have the freedom of choice, right?
Maybe people are a little bit scared of thinking by themselves. Maybe being free is a little bit scary for people. That's why maybe it's a tricky question sometimes, somehow.
Well, yes, it's very complex about how your family and how you were raised and how you were brought up. Okay.
Yeah.
And and what does that actually mean, free, okay? In the meantime, we have everything around us, like the television, right? To keep you quite content in your captured in jail situation, where you're not free at all. But there are things around us in our Western scene to keep us happy. And it's now we're doing 1 year of non-freedom in terms of the COVID virus, and it's interesting to see the reactions of people, and what is the right way to go. You know, is it to accept the kind of the ignorant bumbling of the governments around us, to and not being able to get it together? To how do you revolt against that, and to gain your freedom on the one hand, and on the other hand, not make the virus even stronger than it is going to be. And by, you know,
Bar, I'd like to refocus on jazz. Speaking about jazz, there is a Dixieland. We were talking about Dixieland. There is a Dixieland idiom when you want to express yourself into Dixieland music. There is a bebop idiom. You need to learn the vocabulary of bebop. Is there a free jazz idiom also when you want to express yourself within free jazz?
Well, yes, there's I'm not quite sure what you're meaning when you say free jazz. Here in Europe, the free improvised music, right, spontaneous composition, etc., is a different scene than free jazz. Free jazz for me is already a style in a way that you have to do an apprenticeship for. Maybe it's a completely different apprenticeship than before Dixieland and bebop and swing, and very, very different, but there is an apprenticeship for it. And whereas the free improvisation is more as an apprenticeship of your own self, rather than of an outside form that you're trying to master to be able to participate in. Okay?
Right.
That's what I would say. So I'm not quite sure which the area you're in when you say free jazz, because it can cover the things from the historic free jazz, going back to the music of the 60s and 70s to
because according to you, free jazz is already a tree with different branches that spread out through the years. It comes from a grassroots, but it's so much spread out nowadays.
Normal growth.
Bar, the first time I saw you performing was in the late 90s at the Nîmes Jazz Festival. It was a duet with a jazz teacher at the jazz department of the Nîmes Conservatoire, Alexis Clapeau. And what struck me was, for me, it was one of the first experience with free jazz. It seemed to me the most challenging music to perform. Yeah.
Well, yes and no. You know, when you're playing classical music or you're playing traditional jazz, codified jazz, bebop, Dixieland, whatever, you have the whole history of those musics. Okay, you're going to play Bach. You have hundreds of years of history of previously people playing Bach, right? And now it's time for you to make your statement about Bach. That has a lot of responsibility in it and a lot of problems that doing your own improvisation does not have, okay? the problems are different, when there's the known material and when there is your own material. Because the free improviser today, he really comes with a vocabulary. And I think that the free improviser today is, there is the solo work, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And there is the group work. Improvisation really is a group activity. The free improvised solo is the person playing his own pieces, his own music. Whether you want to call them pieces because they're formally presented in terms of pieces and recognizably so, or whether he's the person is using a different formal structure, so it's not so recognizable, and in terms of pieces, okay.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really matter, but the difficulties are different in that communication, musical communication for me is when the vibration, the life of the performer is such that it goes into the sound, physically into the sound, and that it's communicated to the outside world, to the audience, if you will, through the sound, that is actually contained in the sound, into and that is the transport article. When that sound has to be dealing with a historical music, jazz, classical music, or it's much more complicated in that what you do with that material, with that classical material, right?
Yeah.
There's an intellectual content. There's so many different kinds of sensitivity, which are present in free improvised music, but which are judged only in themselves and not in relationship to a historical music, right? It's incredible listening to classical music today. I don't know. I heard on France Musique this morning of yet another version of the Tchaikovsky violin concerto, and this player who was playing it was so good. It was unbelievable.
Really? Yeah.
Yes, it was unbelievable how he could execute, how he musically dominated this completely ludicrous music, right? I mean, it's well, without talking about the piece, it was so interesting, so good because of what this man could do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's put the whole history of that piece on his back.
Yeah.
To play.
Bar, we are coming to the end of our program. I have only two last questions. I'd like you to tell us who are the musicians with whom you had the most pleasure to play with.
That's nice. That's nice. Yeah. So it's so complex because there's the living pleasure and there's the musical pleasure.
Right.
I'm playing currently, and we've been playing together for over 20 years with two Swiss friends, Urs Gruber and Jazzd'aià.
Mm-hmm.
And this trio music over the 20 years has always been completely improvised, and no themes, no ideas, no discussion before or after the music, right? And it's just improvising in terms of what happens during this time together is what happens during this time together.
Mm-hmm.
And I like these men very much, right? So in terms of who I am today and what I'm doing today, they would be right up at the top of the list of Urs Leinweber, Jazzd'aià. Now, the of historical figures going on, the I enjoyed very much and had a long time relationship with Paul Bley.
Paul Bley, yeah, we didn't mention Paul Bley during this interview, but you played throughout quite a long time with Paul Bley, yeah.
Yes, no, it was not that often, but during many, many years. I met him in my very earliest days in New York. So, I mean, already in 1963, probably 1962 already, I had met and played with Paul, and it was such a rewarding and enlightening experience to me to play with him. And through the years of meeting up again, a lot of that is recorded, right? There's a bit of following that can be done there.
It's always been an enjoyment playing with him, right?
Yes, it's a musical enjoyment because our discussion about harmony and melody just carried on for something like 50 years, you know, going on and on and on as through the years we would meet, and so. But yeah,
Bar, do you have any regrets in your career?
Regrets?
Yeah. Do you have any?
No. I feel that I've been a very lucky man, and to be able to do what I've done and to be allowed to do that.
You'd have the opportunity to do it once again. Would you do the same?
I don't know about the same, because that would be living everything over again. That's
that's true. Very clever. Yeah.
I don't think that's going to be possible, but we'll see if
that's good.
Next time with my next incarnation, if that's what happens, that we're born again, or what happens.
It only remains me to say to the viewers that you released in 2018 a record named End to End. And my last question would be, if you were living in an island, an isolated island, what record would you bring if it's only one record?
Wow. What would I take if I had a choice of one record?
Yeah, you only have one choice.
I'm thinking.
Yeah. You never thought about it?
No.
You don't have any preferred record?
No.
Okay.
I quit listening to records wow, around 1960, realizing that every record I listened to, which I listened to a lot of records previous to that, I wasn't practicing.
Okay.
And so I gave up record listening to practice, you know. And I would imagine it would be a Louis Armstrong record.
Louis Armstrong, Kid Ory, like the first thing that you listened to during your childhood when you got hooked with jazz, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Somebody who blew me away then and still does today.
Okay. So Barre, it was a very nice pleasure and an honor to receive you in this program and listening to all the different anecdotes and story you tell us today. Thank you very much, and
sure,
wish you all the best in this kind of interesting situation with the sanitary crisis we've been through. But thank you very much, and see you soon. Bye bye.
Okay, ciao.
Bye bye.
Ciao.